Hi, I'm Brodie. We're back in my shop once again, and Mitch is behind the cameras. And we're working on Aermacchi this week. We did the Tiger Cub last week, and we're back on Aermacchi. We're going to make a belly pan today. What is a belly pan? The belly pan goes underneath. It's part of the rules for vintage racing, actually all racing on motorcycles, I think, that's on a track. If you blow up your motor, you don't want the oil to fall down onto the track. So it's a catch pan that goes underneath the engine and the transmission. And it became a rule in WMRA, that's the Washington Motorcycle Road Race Association. That was like in early 2000s. So I had to make a belly pan. This was the prototype that I made. It's made out of aluminum, and I got a sheet over here. It's 3003. That's aluminum which is relatively easy to bend. It's weldable. It's 80 thou thick, 080. And it took me a little while to find this time, but I did. This one is too shallow. It doesn't come up enough. There's a regulation. Part of the rules say that it has to hold so much. So I made this one, and then I realized that no, it doesn't hold enough. I don't think anybody ever really looks at the belly pan and says it doesn't hold enough. But so I made up a template. I was experimenting years ago. Last time I made a belly pan was probably, I'm guessing, 18 years ago. So you could say that I'm rusty. To actually find this stuff, this bending stuff, it took me an hour because I couldn't remember where in my shop it was. I was running around and upstairs, flashlights, and I finally found it back over there and under a shelf. This is the template. So this gets cut on the bandsaw, and then it gets bent. And these are the benders. I made these up. This one goes in the vise. Then for the second bend, you can't use the vise anymore, I don't think. You have to use the arbor press. So this is the template, and we're going to do some bending. And I've got some other things. I do a little bit of forming around this wood block. And then when I hold it, I've got this piece, and I use some C-clamps for the welding. So this is the first time in the series of our videos that I'm welding aluminum. Aluminum's a little tricky to learn. It took me quite a while to learn. I kept putting the tungsten into the metal, and then finally, months later, I realized that it's because I couldn't see. It's because the puddle gets so shiny, you can't see where you are. Then I realized that if you look at the right spot, there's a reflection, and you see the tungsten and the reflection, and that's how you tell how close you are. Until I figured that out, I had a lot of trouble welding aluminum. So anyway, we're going to see how we do today, how I do today with the welding. And I do want to thank Metal Mart. They've been very helpful. They cut metal for me. They're kind of like a sponsor. They're just in Langley here. So thank you, Metal Mart. Here's a piece of metal. It got sheared at Metal Mart, and I've got a smaller shear here, and there's my line. So this is the piece I need to cut off. My shop is actually quite small for how much I have. So this is why I mount this up on the mill table, because I don't have a bench to mount it anywhere. And then it gets stashed away when it's not being used. When you have a shop, you just have to figure out how to make things work, because space can be at a premium sometimes. So watching the line. I'm doing a pretty good job of staying on the line. There we go. Got my red Sharpie, my trusty red Sharpie. So I'm going to go around this and mark it, and then we'll go to the bandsaw. I used to make these and sell them to the racers, and it was a bit of work. It's not the easiest job, and welding aluminum is not one of my strong points, and neither is sheet metal. And so you kind of combine the two. But tell you right now, I'm not an expert with sheet metal, but I do get by. There's a shape. I'm going to go to the vise now, take a file, because it's going to be a lot easier to file this while it's flat and not in the shape of a belly pan. So we'll do that. And on the Aermacchi race bike here, I'll show you what's new because we didn't do that yet. I worked on a shape. I spent basically almost the whole day working on this, filling it out. And Mitch will show you a photo of the inside. I used masking tape. I used a glue gun. I used welding rods as reinforcement. I used a variety of techniques to come up with this shape, which is kind of rigid and solid, and it fits on like so, and it fits quite nicely. And that's where the fuel tap's going to go. This is the mount, so there'll be a piece hanging down here, mounts onto the rubber, and then foam underneath, foam on top. That's going to hold it all in place. So kind of happy with that. So that's why we're doing the belly pan this week, because the belly pan is a lot easier than this. So the belly pan is a warm-up to the aluminum gas tank. That's what's going on. Now we have to bend. So I'm going to show you my bending apparatus. That it took a little while to figure out how to do this years ago. So I got some DOM tubing. It doesn't have to be DOM, and DOM means seamless. It's drawn over mandrel. It's very expensive tubing, but I guess I had it lying around, so I used it. And there's space there so that this piece of aluminum fits in there. It's got a couple stops, and they are 3/8 of an inch in behind the outermost surface here of the tube. So this is going to go in like this. See, it slides in, and then this is the same length as the belly pan. So I line up with my fingers, and then that goes against the stop like that. So that's how I bend it. And then I hold this in the vise here, and then I pull back. Now I have to bend the sides first, and then I bend the ends. If I bend the ends first, I can't bend the sides. So there's an order here. If you get things out of order, it doesn't work. In machining, that happens a lot. So you always have to think of the process and what's next. Yeah, like that. Can you see how this piece is resting down there? If I didn't have this, I don't know how I would bend it, because you can't use a regular roller like in sheet metal, because then you'd be rolling this as well. You don't want to do that. So it has to be the right length. If I pull from here, it's going to bend in the middle here, and I don't want it to bend in here. I want the bottom to be flat, and I don't want to have to hammer it afterwards. So that's why I'm using a 2x4, and I don't know how many pounds this is, but it's got some weight to it. So I'm also pressing down to put a little bit of tension on it. What I'm looking for is a 90. That's what I want it to be. And it's pretty close. It's still up 5 degrees. I don't know. Okay, we'll try that. Getting warm in here. Got a bulge there. Okay, we're going to go to the arbor press. So my technique here is to, one hand holds it down and the other hand lifts it up. Let's see what happens. There we go. So it's not going all the way. So what I'm going to do is to lift up and reposition like that, and now I can get some extra. Okay, I've done, that's good. So there's a bend. So you can see that this has to come in and those two have to meet, then it can be welded. You notice how this just goes under there? It's almost like it was a perfect fit. And I need one more little bend. I'm sure there'll be some comments on this. I'm sure about that. One more. Ouch. Okay. Calling that bent. I think what I did now is to hold this in the vise and hammer this. I believe that's what I did. So let's try it. Okay, so as long as it comes together, that's really all that matters right now, because it can be made to be rounder. It just has to come together, and this will happen later. After this is welded here, then I'll work on that. Okay, so we still have a little gap. I'll try a tack there and see what happens. So we'll set the welder up. I have two different kinds of welding rods here. I've got 1100 and I got 5356. I got a friend who's a good welder. He used to weld a lot of aluminum in the aircraft business, and he says when you tack 3003, use a 5356 rod for tacking, and then for the actual weld you use 1100. So I'm going by his advice because he's done way more aluminum welding than I have. So starting with 5356. Okay, it's tacked. I need to fill that just a little bit, but that comes from the other side. Man, it's been months since I welded aluminum. or more. Yeah, use my body weight. Oh, that came up quite nicely. That might be the best one yet. It's harder to go up to an end and stop than to start at the end. Okay, I think I can weld that. So we'll move on to another one. I'm going to call it for the hammering and we'll switch to the welding. I've got the 53, 56 rod. I'm going to do a series of little small tacks, and then when I do all four corners, then I'll switch to the 1100 rod and I'll do a seam right up there. So the first one is just kind of a stitch weld, every so often a little bit of weld holding it in place. Okay, so everything is tacked in place now. So I'm going to switch rods. Let's see how the 1100 rod does. There's the last one. It's looking okay. Started and stopped 3 times there. What's going to happen now is I want to weld up the inside. out. So I'm going to get in there and I can put a nice bead hole up there, and then that's going to stay there, and then the outside will get filed down and smoothed out, things like that. So here we go. At the end, when I'm starting and I'm stopping and starting and stopping, what that does, it allows the aluminum to cool down a little bit because I'm coming up to the edge. And if you just keep going, it's easy to burn through. So that's what I'm trying not to do, is to burn through. It's grabbing, yeah. Anyway, you can see what's going on there, how it kind of smooths. I'm just taking the worst of it off, and then maybe later I'll take a file and smooth it out, make it a little bit nicer. Yeah, it doesn't like that way so much. Okay, let's try this then. Let's use a file and see what happens with that. That might be better here. So that's the rough work done with the file. We're just going to leave it like that right now, and then I can always polish it more. What we're going to do now is to take the mount off the other one, mount it on this, and then this part here, it goes over the frame rail under the swing arm mount, and it gets bent backwards. So this becomes a hinge. When you want to access a drain plug, for example, you undo the front mount, it drops down, and then you can empty your oil. Oh, it's got oil in it. I'm going to drill some holes on the drill press. Oops. Okay, see how it's off? It's not in the middle. So now what I do is I hit it at an angle. And now we're in the middle. There we go. So you always punch lightly at first. And you check where you punch. Make an adjustment. I made the mount nice and wide so that it spreads out the load. If you just put a small mount on there, it'll probably crack, because aluminum, especially the thin stuff, it has a tendency to do that. So this is better, having a longer mount and spreading the load. Okay, so we're going to see how it fits on the bike now. That's the mount that it goes onto. So and you see at the back here, you see how there's the crankcase and the tube. This is the tube that becomes the hinge point. So these two tabs have to be bent over that tube. So it gets fed up like that, and it just fits on. There's not a lot of room between the exhaust pipe. There we go. So the front's in. And then if you, can you zoom in on the back here? Can you see how those tabs, these tabs have to be bent around, and they actually have to be shortened up a little bit. So what I'll do is I'm going to make a mark where they are when the belly pan is level with the crankcase, and then I'll bend that. Okay, so I've got this held not very well at all, but maybe it's enough to put a bend in, because this is not that hard to bend, as you can see. But I have to be able to put it on. So yeah, that bent okay. It's just bending around a 7/8 rod, but I don't know how I hold this one while I bend that one. Well, maybe just freehand. Just like that. Nothing scientific about that at all. So, okay, for this to go over the frame tube, I think it's almost like we've got to lift up the bike. So, I'm not sure. Let's go check. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Well, I'm gonna make a cut here anyway. We're gonna cut these off, and then maybe I need to make them a little bit shorter, but somehow we have to figure. I can't remember what I did all those years ago. I did something and it worked. So. Okay. Somehow we'll get this on. Well, let's just lift the front of the bike way up. There we go, look at that. Okay. Okay, so it's mounted, and it's not quite level, so what I have to do is I just have to work these hinges at the back. Oh, I see. Oh, look at that. Okay, so it's kind of twisted. It's actually not bad. It just doesn't sit down right away like it should. So there we go. That's the belly pan. I'm gonna make it all smooth and polished up. It'll look very nice, I think. Thank you very much for watching our video. It's been a pleasure having you with us. Mitch and I like coffee. If you buy us coffee, that would be fantastic. See you next week. Take care.